Now we're going to look at the energy needs of the heart. The heart has a very high metabolism, so it uses lots of ATP. Right? It has to work 24/7, your whole entire life. It never gets to take a break or rest. So it's going through massive amounts of ATP, keeping you alive. Now think back to chapter 3 and what you learned about ATP. In order to make ATP, the cell needs certain things. You have to have a fuel source. Now back in chapter 3, we talked about glucose and fat as fuel sources. You also need oxygen. The more oxygen you have, then the more you can keep going in cellular respiration and not have to switch over to fermentation. And you get more ATP when you have oxygen. The third thing you need is mitochondria. Mitochondria are the organelles where cellular respiration occurs and where the majority of ATP comes from. Remember, glycolysis occurs outside the mitochondria and gives you 2 ATP, but then once you go into the mitochondria, you get another 34 ATP. So the heart has features to maximize these. If you maximize these 3 things, then you will maximize your ATP production. So let's look at the features of the heart. The first one here, this menu, says, I'm so hungry I'll take one of everything on the menu. And if you look at the menu for the heart, you have glucose, fat, lactic acid, ketones, amino acids. This goes beyond just the glucose and fat that we learned about in chapter 3. The heart is not picky. It will use a variety of fuel molecules. So number 1 here is variety of fuels. It's kind of the opposite of neurons. Neurons will only use glucose. They're very picky. The heart is not picky at all. The heart is like the one who's hungry and will eat anything. Even some of these things are waste products from other cells, like the lactic acid and the ketones. That's waste that other cells put into the blood, and the heart's like, hey, you're not going to eat that? I'll take it. And it uses those. When it comes to oxygen, you have 2 things that help you out with oxygen. So number 2 and number 3 here both go along with oxygen. You have extensive coronary circulation. Yes, the heart is filled with blood. But the blood that's in it is there to be pumped. It's not being nourished by the blood. Right here is the aorta. Remember, the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle is being pumped into the aorta. And you can see right here at the base of the aorta, on each side, are your coronary arteries. They are the first branches to come off from the aorta there with oxygenated blood. And they branch out onto the surface of the heart and deliver oxygenated blood to all of the heart muscle cells. Your heart also has lots of myoglobin. Hopefully you remember this from chapter 10 about muscles. We first learned about myoglobin in muscles. Myoglobin is similar to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's in the blood, myoglobin's in the muscle. Myoglobin stores oxygen. And it's red. So that's what gives meat its red color. The more red a meat is, the more myoglobin it is. Your heart is very much red. And the reason that it's red is because it has myoglobin. So when you are resting, and you're not using a lot of oxygen, your heart hoards it. It's like an episode of Hoarders. Your heart has all this myoglobin, and it's grabbing all this oxygen and hoarding it. Then when you're active and your heart needs that oxygen, it has it to use. And getting oxygen to your heart is very, very important. Ischemia is a condition in which you would not get enough oxygen. And remember, other cells would switch to fermentation. Well, your heart can't survive on fermentation. That's not enough ATP for it. So if you get ischemia, not enough oxygen to your heart cells, that is what can lead to a heart attack. So getting plenty of oxygen to your heart is very important. And then with mitochondria. So right here it says, look at all my mitochondria. Here's a mitochondria. Heart cardiac muscle cells have the most mitochondria of any cell in the body. In fact, they are 25% mitochondria. That is more than any other cell in the body. So your heart is packed full of mitochondria to make lots of ATP to keep it going.